Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for Unpacking Common Approach to Impact Measurement, Session 2. My name is Garth. I'm the head of data standards for Common Approach to Impact Measurement. To get today's session started in a good way, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement. I'm joining today's call from the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Comox First Nation on what's currently called Vancouver Island in the province of British Columbia. You're welcome in the chat to honor your own Indigenous hosts in your own areas today. Like most places, the place where I live is a really interesting place with a history of overlapping and shared territory. The Comox First Nation has overlapping and shared territory with neighbors, including Homalco, Hulkaminam, Sunawas, Nutadalt, Seashelt, Snunimuk, Siwayaman, Tamuk, Tlawasis, Wiweke, Wiwekam, Kwika. The common interpretation of reconciliation in a modern Canadian context is that it means the reconciliation of relationships between Indigenous and settler people. It's the reconciliation part of truth and reconciliation. Acknowledging the land is an act in support of reconciliation, but it's not the whole action. It's just a reminder. It's a reminder that we, and as there's often quite a bit of diversity in the audience that we present to, I'll clarify that my we in this moment mainly refers to myself or others from settler and colonizer cultures. It's a reminder that life's too short to just rely only on learning from our own experiences if we don't want to repeat mistakes or perpetuate harms. We need to learn from others' experiences of Canada's history of colonization, of genocide, of theft of land from Indigenous people. This acknowledgement is a reminder to put ongoing effort into acting on what we learn to reconcile our relationships. And this ongoing effort is like making bread. It has to be made and remade every day. So I invite you to hold this reminder as we learn together, conduct our business, and build relationships here today and every day to sustain each other and the land that sustains us. In today's session, we will recap briefly what was covered in session 1 on common foundations. We'll talk a little bit about the way that shareable impact data empowers social purpose organizations, or SPOs. The bulk of the presentation will be in describing the Common Impact Data Standard, one of the 4 standards of common approach, and how it works and what you can do now to experience its uses for yourself. Let's start by recapping what is the Common Foundation Standard and what are all 4 of the standards of common approach to impact measurement. So Common Approach is a standard-setting organization. We are sharing 4 standards that work together to support flexible, shareable impact measurement. These standards support our vision of shareable impact data in the following ways. We have this vision of a future where impact measurement is valuable, and at the very least, not a burden to be carried by social purpose organizations. And a future where funders and investors are collecting impact data and can still get the information they need. The Common Foundation Standard focuses on helping social purpose organizations measure what's most useful to them and having the power to choose the methods that they use to collect impact data. The Common Impact Data Standard that we'll spend most of our time on today is about how software can interact with impact data and how social purpose organizations can convert impact data into many different formats, including formats that are easier for funders to use. The Common Form talks about how to collect descriptive data about organizations and understand who is doing the impact that is described in the Common Impact Data Standard. And Common Framework talks about how you can group dissimilar indicators together into an overall view of what's happening across a variety of different reports and data points. Brief recap. In the last session, we took a look at how the Common Foundations Standard provides some widely understood definitions of the terms involved in doing good enough impact measurement. It's right there in the name. Common Foundations ensures a solid footing, no matter what your specific measurement approach is. Most organizations put together a variety of different measurement approaches in the overall landscape of how they gather and collect and analyze and share data. The point of Common Foundations isn't to say this is the gold standard, best way, the method that you should follow, but to say whatever method you choose, is it good enough? Does it cover the essential practices of describing the change that you're trying to achieve, choosing indicators, collecting useful information, gauging performance and impact from that information you've collected, and then communicating and using those results? Uh, Before you get into the sort of phase of pulling together reports and sharing impact data with other people using a common impact data standard, it's really important to have that good foundational understanding of whether whatever approach you've chosen meets a minimum standard, a good enough standard for impact measurement. So, why the focus on shareable data for social purpose organizations? Well, the key sort of vision and guiding principles of Common Approach to Impact Measurement is that we're trying to empower social purpose organizations and those that they serve through our standards. So we start by acknowledging that impact measurement is a system-wide phenomenon. Many people are involved in all of those essential practices that I just described of setting goals, collecting data, interpreting it, using it, sharing it. And we can think about some of the relationships in that network because people who are generating summaries or reports on impact and sending that data to someone else, and on the receiving end, a report receiver, often a funder or investor, but also sometimes somebody who's convening a network or a collaborative. But the recommendation that came in Common Foundations about choose the methods that work for you. Well, that recommendation really centers on a you that we haven't always clearly defined, or there might be more than one you. When we say that the really, a really good foundational impact measurement starts with your theory of change, setting your goals, collect data that's useful to you, who gets to be that you between the sender and the receiver of a report? So there's two sort of strategies that we see play out. And we've seen this through our own projects, and this is widely documented in other reports on impact measurement. You have approaches like the one I'm displaying here, where there's a report receiver that says, send us whatever information you have. Choose the methods that work for you, gathering the data, use whatever systems you want, whatever data formats you want, send us what you've got, and we will make sense of it. That's a very low burden on the sender and a laudable approach for a funder to give that flexibility. But on the receiver side, um, that can be a real mess when you get 20, 30, 40, 50 organizations data all together and you are trying to say overall, um, what is a portfolio level view of all these reports? If you in turn as a report receiver need to turn around to your own funders and say, what's happening across all these organizations on a general theme like youth empowerment or poverty reduction, it quickly becomes pretty difficult to search through or summarize data from several organizations when it comes in so many different formats um, and in such variety. So this is partly why we also see this other strategy where um, we create a low burden for the receiver of the information. They can get their data through tidy, consistent forms. Many of you on the call today who've reported to funders may have experienced this, where go to the website, enter in the data for your reporting period with specific indicators, specific numbers to report. That's very tidy and elegant for the funder, but this can put a high burden on the sender, not just because some things get lost in translation when you try to put it into a form, but when that relationship is multiplied across several funders, it results in a lot of redundant work. Um, so this is the challenge. When those are your options, someone always ends up burdened, either by having to make sense of a lot of very disparate data or by having to do a lot of reporting in duplicate with variations on a theme when the differences between what you may be sharing may not actually be all that different. Here's further elaboration of our vision about how the Common Impact Data Standard should help. Um, we believe that the Common Impact Data Standard can unlock shareable data. The standards exists to create a system for easier and more flexible sharing of impact data that creates a win-win situation where both senders and receivers can have impact measures that align well to their own strategies, goals, and activities, um, and then can still result in streamlined reports for funders that you know gives them the same result as using a form, but without having to impose that level of structure or strict definition of measurement approaches or indicators on those that are reporting to them. If this all works the way that we hope that it does, and we are seeing signs of it in the pilot tests that we're doing with the data standard, it lets the organizations measure what matters to them in the way that best captures the work they're doing, use the data to run an even more impactful organization. So, really focus on what you need to learn and improve, and to share what you measure with those that you need or want to report to without having to redo your measurement for each version of reporting that you need to do. And for the funders and investors, that lets you create a portfolio level analysis from the rainbow, call it, of a variety of different flavors, colors of impact reporting that you may take in. It may relieve you as a funder of the need to prescribe strictly impact metrics, indicators, outcomes in a very narrow way that creates that need for translation on the part of the report sender, and that then also unlocks your ability to see more clearly how have the organizations that you're funding described or determined themselves what are the best ways to measure and understand their work and how it's making change. So those would all be wonderful outcomes, wouldn't they? So with that big promise laid out, let's talk about what the Common Impact Data Standard is. The Common Impact Data Standard is a standardized way to represent in data the common concepts and relationships in an organization's impact model. And you could also describe an impact model as a theory of change or a logic model or an outcome change chain. Um, Pardon me. So the data standard enables software to exchange impact information regardless of the differences between impact models used by different organizations. Um, Different theories of change look different, essentially. Organizations may use any variety of different ways of describing what leads to what so that something happens, but they all use similar concepts. So these concepts are described by the 5 dimensions of impact as outlined by Impact Management Project, now housed at Impact Frontiers. In general, the concepts are that give us a vocabulary to talk about impact and impact measurement are what outcomes happen and how important are they. We have words describing that. We have who is experiencing the outcomes and how underserved are they relative to the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. We describe how much change is experienced by how many people and for how long. We describe the contribution of efforts for better outcomes for the stakeholders and the risk that the impact that happens is different than expected. Are there unexpected adverse consequences to something that we're trying to do? And then plus, we also add into the Common Impact Data Standard some concepts and ways of describing how impact actually happens. What are the activities that take place that lead to the outcomes? And I'll emphasize here that this is all really just like this is just the level of concepts. We're not really talking about data structure yet. This is what are the ideas involved in any approach to impact measurement that might fit into the common foundation standard we described earlier. Lots of different ways to get at information that describes these things at a conceptual level. The next thing about the Common Impact Data Standard you should know is that it's a data ontology. And I'm going to take some time on this term because the word ontology doesn't pop up in day-to-day conversation for most people. So starting from a more familiar idea of vocabulary, we have vocabulary as a set of terms for things. Like in a forest, you can have tree, forest, acorn, habitat, biome, lots of words in a list that you would learn in school. What's the vocabulary list of things related to forest? Then there's taxonomy. That connects levels of things. So in a forest, you could describe the animals using this big list of categories for animals that might break down into levels, more specific the further down you go until you can separate the orders in between, squirrels and foxes falling into their respective orders. That's a way of taking vocabulary and organizing it in a certain way. And an ontology is a way to organize vocabulary and taxonomy together in a meaningful way. It lets us get more specific about the nature of the relationships between things that are in our vocabulary list and how they work together in a system. So, in an ontology, distinct from vocabulary or taxonomy, you can see this lines that say has habitat. We might define that this has habitat line is always going to connect an animal to a biome. That's richer than the sort of connections between levels in a taxonomy, which just kind of abstractly indicate that one is a subcategory of the level above it. Something like has habitat or other types of connections can, in an ontology, you can have more rules for these relationships. They're called axioms. We can say, for example, that an animal must always have a habitat of some kind. We could also say, for example, that all animals have a weight. A woodpecker and a fox and a squirrel are all animals. And so if I get a report about a fox, but it doesn't have any information about its weight, I wouldn't assume that it has no weight, that there's not a weightless fox just somehow floating around above the ground in the forest somewhere. I know it has a weight because of the axiom that says an animal has a weight, just like an animal has a habitat. That kind of inference, that there aren't just animals weightlessly floating around the forest, that comes really naturally to humans. And I've used it deliberately because it's kind of a silly example, but it's pretty challenging for a computer working with data about animals and information about animals to make that kind of inference. If information is missing, a standard database will just be say, nope, that information is not there at all. But if we give computers a data ontology and this information about relationships, they have a much easier time making inferences or making connections and understanding relationships between data, more like the way that people do with regular language. On to how that works with a data standard. The Common Impact Data Standard is a data ontology that uses a resource description framework, or RDF. RDF is a way of describing data in short sentences, little short phrases, so that it's easier for computers to understand. It's the grammar and sentence structure of data that makes it accessible to computers. So these short sentences, like the examples I have here, a squirrel has a habitat, and that habitat is forest. A squirrel is a subclass of animal. You can see that's pulling pieces out of the taxonomy. An animal has a weight, and the weight is in grams. It's always in the form, RDF is always in the form of subject, predicate, and object. And all of the data that might go around describing impact and the chains of connection between how things happen in an impact model or in an impact report will get broken down in the data standard into these little short phrases, subject, predicate, object. That is how RDF works and how our data standard works. So pulling together what I just described in the last couple slides, there are a bunch of vocabularies and taxonomies out there for concepts in our domain in impact measurement. I already talked through the concepts, some of the vocabulary words that exist from impact management norms. There's also vocabularies like lists of themes, like the social development goals or sustainable development goals, the IRIS plus metrics. IRIS, that library has a sort of a combination of vocabulary and taxonomy where they have layers that connect to each other of categories, themes, goals, metric sets. But the challenge is that all of those separate vocabularies and technologies um, don't necessarily connect to each other in a way, like where you can definitely say, oh, this goal in this taxonomy is the same as this one over here. We don't have a established structure until now with Common Impact Data Standard to say this thing's the same as that one, and we want to link them together. And also, and maybe more importantly, people make up their own indicators, outcomes, impacts. People make up new words all the time. That's how we ended up with Riz as a word. That's just how humans work with language. So we need a way to work with impact data that recognizes that flexibility of people bringing their own definitions. Like even if you do make up some excellent indicators and outcomes, Iris Plus isn't going to add them to their taxonomy. So we need something like an RDF based ontology, like Common Impact Data Standard, to be able to combine together different vocabularies and different taxonomies and put those together into an overall connected picture of our whole story about how to meaningfully understand data in an impact report. So I'm going to break down like a simpler example of this. That was quite a lot in that last slide. That was the really big picture. Let's break it down to like one organization's report. You may have something that aligns to what we call an outcome in the vocabulary described in the Common Impact Data Standard. You might call it an objective or a result or an effect or something in your own spreadsheet or database, but all of those ideas map conceptually to the idea of an outcome. And an outcome may be connected to an indicator in your database. And you might call that a KPI or a measure or an index, but all of those things could fit under the umbrella label of indicator. Doesn't mean you have to change the name in your software. It can keep being called measure in your software, but we just know that we're mapping it to concepts. And we know that an outcome may have multiple indicators. And also there might be an indicator that connects to multiple outcomes. Whether or not data is in a database, when you start talking about how impact happens and what relates to what, it can be pretty complicated and have lots of layers to it. That proliferating nature of impact data to have one to many and many to many relationships between indicators, outcomes, reports, themes, etc., that can be a huge headache in a spreadsheet. But when you break it down into those little short sentences of subject, predicate, object with RDF, they simply become additional sentences in a list of sentences. You don't get so tangled up in connections between data. And that's important because there are a lot of different moving parts in impact data. Depending on how complex your impact measurement approach is, you might also want to include things like targets and indicators and metadata, like the time and place that things were measured, and methods that you used, and this outcome, what stakeholders is it relevant to? How do these things all roll up to overall themes of impact? Those things may not all be in one data store. That may be multiple different spreadsheets or databases that are tracking different parts of this, and you want to tie them all together. This is a diagram out of the actual Common Impact Data Standard technical document that shows the sort of high-level model of the core concepts and relationships that are in the data standard. You can see the long-form version of this at ontology.commonapproach.org on the Common Impact Data Standard page. The purpose of this isn't to show, isn't to have all of you look at this and memorize on first sight what all of the relationships are in the overall map of the concepts, but it's just to say this is what the data standard is. It's a vocabulary of terms and arrows showing what the relationships between those terms are. Bringing it back to the example I showed earlier, subject, predicate, object. An outcome has an indicator. There's an indicator. An indicator has an indicator report. Indicator report like number of meals served, 21 meals served in the month of June in the indicator report. Indicator report has value number. So that's the RDF underlying sort of structure that the data standard works on. So what do you see when you're using this on the front end? You may have your data in a spreadsheet like this, where you've got your organization and its projects, and you've got some goals and metrics, and you've brewed yourself up a nice spreadsheet to manage that information. You can break it out into these little sets of here's a goal, it has a metric, and here is the metric, a subject, a predicate, and an object. Any spreadsheet, any database can be broken out into those little short phrases, just as a long list of little phrases. You don't have to worry about that because that happens in the background and gets spat out in some sort of RDF syntax. I'm showing on the screen an example of what it looks like as JSON LD or JSON linked data. That's just one way of sharing RDF that computers like to read, not intended for humans to look at. And honestly, you will probably never actually need to see this yourself unless you are directly working as a developer using the data standard. But it contains the same bits. There's a subject, there's a predicate that says it has, this is an outcome, it has an indicator, and here is the link that goes to the indicator. It's just a different way of formatting those connections between bits in a way that a computer likes to read. And we call those impact data capsules. You can take any data source, turn it into an impact data capsule, and another aligned software can read it. And I will get into that in the last bit of the presentation. So I hope that explains sort of conceptually, high level, what is the Common Impact Data Standard and how does it work? It's a standardized vocabulary and set of concepts and relationships that can describe any organization's impact model and data, regardless of the specific terms you use or the specific way that you conceive of your measurement approach and how to describe it. And it's a tool that allows the creation of machine readable formats so that different systems can share that data with each other with much less work than it takes to do that out of traditional relational databases. Makes data exchange more flexible. One sheet can export data in multiple different ways as needed. This doesn't dictate you what you measure or how. It doesn't specify what outcomes you use. It just says whatever you fits under the concept of outcome just gets labeled as being that concept. And we hope that this frees up time so that you can spend more time on analysis and learning and less time on repeatedly reformatting and recleaning your data to fit somebody else's table format or schema. And importantly, RDF formats for data is the foundation that you need if you want to get into the realm of building knowledge graphs, doing inferential reasoning, like I described earlier, having sort of more human understandable semantic interaction, like through a chat agent or AI. All of those things are are much more easily built from a foundation of data in RDF format than in a traditional relational database. So that's some of the future promise that we're building towards with the data standard. How does this work in practice? Going back to the sender and receiver model that we talked about earlier, a report sender uses a piece of software, a data utility, or a software as a service, cloud product that has aligned with the data standard in its backend, and get your report data entered into that software, and then export in a RDF format. We uh, specify JSON LD as the syntax for Exchange right now. And then on the receiving end, a report receiver uses a data utility or software aligned with the data standard to import that data and then convert it into whatever format they want in their system. So I want to just make clear that the Common Impact Data Standard isn't a software tool itself that does that data sharing and conversion. It's more a set of rules or a framework that any software can use to create that functionality in their software. So if you have a impact measurement software that you love, you could tell them that you're interested in having the Common Impact Data Standard implemented in your software, and we would be happy to talk to them about that. So breaking that down into just very clear steps. So like I said from the outset, if you want to get into this, it's important to come from a starting point that you are confident in the integrity and trustworthiness of the data that you are going to use to report. Provided that that's the case, that you have clear outcomes, indicators, reports, numbers, could include qualitative data to an extent, although that's something we're still working on. Um, you can enter that into an aligned piece of software. So that could be something that looks spreadsheetish, Google Sheets or Excel or Airtable, or it could be a software like Clear Impact or bWorld or some of the others that are aligned on our site that you can see on the Common Approach website what the software options are. Then, like I described, you'd export that file. It turns into the file type that I showed the little snippet of. I mean, it's basically just a text file, but that's what comes out. You don't need to look at the contents of it. It's for a computer to write and another computer to read and pull in again. And then investors import that into their own aligned software. And they would end up with a database or spreadsheet that shows them the contents of that file. Might look like this. This is a view of what it might look like in Airtable to see data linked together. Or it can look however they need it to look. Rearranging something from RDF into tables is very, very flexible. It can sort of turn into whatever table structure you want once you've sort of passed it through that Common Impact Data Standard format. And then that's where Common Framework comes in. That's the thing that lets you get data in multiple different formats. By turning it into RDF, it lets you put things that were all different table structures at the beginning into the same table structure for analysis, and then start doing that roll up of um, dissimilar but similar enough outcomes or indicator definitions into overarching definitions to do portfolio level analysis. And that will be covered in the next session on Common Framework. So here's an example that shows how the data standard not just combines organizations from different combines data from different organizations that may be in different formats, but even within one organization's data, it combines data from many different sources. This slide is showing how data from different sources was combined using the Common Impact Data Standard to get insights, um, drilling down into an organization's goal to provide high quality, affordable housing. So this is one of our pilot study test cases. The green box here shows the theme, the overall investment theme that they had declared about providing high quality, affordable housing. There's an indicator about what is resident expenditure on housing that they've defined in a different place than where they've described the overall theme, but we're able to link those two pieces of data together. Orange boxes are data that can be pulled in from external related standards. So there may be definitions of indicators or outcomes related to resident expenditure on housing defined by GRI, by IRIS. Um, I think there's an ISO standard in here. There's the UN goal on I think reduce poverty, or I can't remember which one affordable housing falls into off the top of my head. And then again, coming from another different system, we have the indicator reports themselves. So actual data collected from resident surveys and contextual or benchmark information like from census or other studies. You can pull that data in, and then a separate type of data, demographic data that you want to use because affordability hits differently depending on who you are, where you live, for example, what's your income level. Um, Again, comes from a different source. So the Common Impact Data Standard is like the glue, the universal translator, maybe, that lets all of those data from different sources come in and land in a common structure using the same terms describing the moving parts of impact and how they're related. So yeah, the value of that, again, just to make really clear, is that you would not necessarily expect a grantee or investee who is working on this issue to provide every piece of data that's on here. They might provide parts of it. And the challenge becomes, how do we take that data that we've provided just in what was reported to us and connect it to a broader context of common measures, contextual data, other pieces that help you have a fuller understanding of that organization's contribution in a bigger picture. So what is it that you can do today with Common Impact Data Standard? So this really is for everyone involved in that impact measurement ecosystem of senders and receivers that we, looked at the start. You don't have to understand the data standard to use it. You just need to use an aligned tool. You can, if you're a social purpose organization or funder, use either one of the data utilities that we've developed that lets you work directly with spreadsheets, or use a software that's aligned to the standard. Or if you're a database builder or software developer, speak to us about implementing the data standard in your tool so that it can import and export in RDF formats. All of those, aligned software utilities are what we put under the heading of aligned tools. That lets you interact with data, with the data standard in the back end without having to look directly at JSON LD or the nitty gritty code pieces like I showed. What I'm showing you now is on our website. If you go to the Common Impact Data Standard page, there are three different tiers of alignment for software. And I want to make clear that the tiers of alignment do not signify good, better, or best. If you think of the diagram I showed with all the boxes and arrows combining, it means how many of those boxes and arrows are covered in their level of alignment. For organizations that do not do extremely complex impact measurement, the basic tier that covers theme, outcome, indicator report, and one or two other classes may be sufficient. You might not need to populate a whole bunch of other data about impact measurement. So basic tier might be enough. But for organizations that want to track activity and stakeholder and risk and counterfactual and impact model and outcome chain and a bunch of other things, and you have all that data and you need a way to represent it, you may want a full tier, or you may land somewhere in between. Um, we also have these two data utilities that I've mentioned, Airtable and Excel at the moment, and we're working on Google Sheets. These data utilities will create a table structure for you in one of those platforms, Airtable or Excel, and let you import or export data out of those basically templated versions. And we're working on expanding the functionality of those to work with diverse, I guess, versions of a spreadsheet template. And then in the bottom section here, there are a number of software where we've had conversations with them about alignment, where they already serve customers who do impact measurement in various ways, and they've expressed interest in alignment when they have a specific customer who is saying, yes, we would really like to have common impact data standard embedded in our use of this software. More software organizations could be added to this list at any time. We just need to hear from them, and we hope that may come from some of you on the call. You'll say, "Oh yeah, I use this other Impact XYZ, and they're awesome. I'll make an introduction," and then we'll chat with them and see what we can do. So the realizing the value that we've described in this presentation is a long-term goal. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a bit like how the very first person to have a telephone didn't have anybody else to phone because no one else had one. The data standard is a bit like that. Until all of the people in the ecosystem, or a majority of them, senders and receivers, are all using the data standard as the way to send and receive data with the common format, we won't truly realize the potential benefit that could arise from its use. We're working on really solidifying the tools that we have through our pilot projects, the Pathfinder pilot and the Social Finance Fund work that we're doing on their impact measurement and reporting approach. All of that is helping us develop more fulsome documentation and description about how to use the data standard and the other standards together so that it's clear and accessible and valuable for users. In the meantime, you can still try out our data utilities. Those are freely available on the website. You can choose to use a software that's already aligned. Some of them are free for very basic needs to mid-range to higher price, depending on the sort of level of complexity you need in terms of your data modeling. Like I mentioned, you can encourage software that you're currently using to align with us. We're open to those conversations to see what we can do to help people engage with this and get more out of it. Please join us for the next session where we will talk about where you can go once you have data aligned to the data standard in this way to do a common framework roll up with those dissimilar indicators. We can dig a bit more into that semantic similarity of terms and how the data standard provides a foundation for that next step of aggregation.